alaikum salam, because he thinks I might have wished death be upon him. Salam alaikum, which I didn't. I said assalamu alaikum, and he refuses.
Your character does. It says more than your action. But anyway, go on.
Now,
Your character is
I'm
more
going
than
to say,
that.
wa alaykum as-salam.
Thank you, Aki. Thank you.
May peace be upon you. I'll say it in the English language so that people don't misunderstand. Okay? I'm saying
and
assalamu
upon you.
Not
alaykum.
Zionist.
Peace be upon
Not
you.
to Zionist.
No problem.
Not
He's
to a Zionist.
still our brother.
Somebody
He's a bit lost. He's our brother.
Okay.
He's a bit lost,
Good man.
but he's our brother.
Good guy,
And
you
our
know,
purpose is to spread the love, spread education, spread beautiful ideas so that we can live together in peace. So today we were talking about history. So during this discussion, when we were talking about the claim of the Zionists over the land of Palestine, a lot of points were raised by Joseph, by myself. We talked about history, the presence of the Jewish people in that land, and the absence after the Roman destruction of the city. The destruction of the city of Jerusalem at the hands of Emperor Hadrian in 132 and renaming of the city, all of that we discussed. Now we're coming to the point where I made a claim that the Jewish people were protected by Muslims and the Muslim civilization for over 1,000 years, right? And Joseph came back and he said, no, I don't agree with that. Actually, that claim is problematic. And then I said, now we are talking. Right?
That's actually not what he said. He said, quickly get a camera.
Yes,
Let's record this.
after I said that, get a camera so that we can get this on camera. Where a Jew and a Muslim can talk about the treatment of the Jewish people at the hands of the Muslims throughout the history of Muslim civilization. This is a very, very interesting discussion which I want to get into. No, because me and Joseph are talking.
You can get this, and everyone can ask questions at
so
the end.
Joseph, why do you actually disagree with that claim? My claim is that the Jewish golden age was when the Muslims protected the Jews for over 1,000 years.
Of course you'd say that, you're Muslim. But I'll confirm.
But
I'll respond to what you're saying.
Please.
So one of the things that people that either Muslim apologists propagating Dawah do, they will take a point in history and they'll say it was great at this time, therefore throughout history the Muslims were good to the Jews. And that's simply not true. There were Muslims that oppressed Muslims throughout history, so of course there were Muslims that oppressed Jews throughout history. So I'll give you an example. In Morocco you had a caliphate called the Almohads, and they said to the Jewish people that were living there, either you convert to Islam, which is against Islam. You're going to tell me the Quran says that it doesn't say that, but you either convert to Islam or we kill you. So Jews fled en masse from Morocco, and they went to Egypt. They went to various places, usually under other Muslim caliphates that were more favourable to the Jews. And so, first and foremost, there has never been just a consistent period throughout time for all Muslim caliphates, empires, where the Jews had it good. The second aspect of that is, even when times were great for Jews under Muslim caliphate, it was relative.
Were they ever great?
That's what I'm trying to get to. It was relative. Okay. And they were still second-class citizens. They still had a different tax system. They still weren't allowed to achieve certain positions within that Islamic society. They had greater freedoms and opportunities than in Christendom, but that's not necessarily a good thing, because in Christendom, again, some Christian nations were good to the Jews, others were terrible to the Jews. And so it just depended at which point of history and which rulers you're talking. So categorically, you are wrong if you said that Muslims were always good to the Jews. They weren't. Secondly, I would argue...
That claim?
No. Okay, so what was
Did
your
I say
claim?
always?
You said that the Jews... Okay, what was your statement?
I said the Muslim civilization treated the Jews with utmost respect.
And I just gave you examples where they didn't.
Okay. When I made a general claim, which is based upon the general history of the Muslim civilization. Now, if you show me exceptions to that general rule, I will acknowledge the exceptions, but the exceptions do not represent the general behavior of the Muslim civilization, which goes across over 1,000 years.
So let's take them on.
So let's look at your examples.
So
wait.
Okay, sorry.
You raised some very interesting examples, and this is why I believe someone as intelligent as you
got all the cameras.
ought to know better, because you are a well-read Jewish gentleman,
bad.
and I can see you are.
Give it to the Jew.
I can see you are religiously observant.
So
the mics
racist.
are growing.
He's got 3 mics, I've got none.
You take that one. You take that one.
You get all the views, don't worry.
Okay. So the point I want to pick on is what al-Muwahidun in the Arabic language, or al-Mohads in the English language, did to the Jewish people. Before I get to that example, my contention is, why would you use, for example, ISIS as a representative example for Islam? Okay, only 2 kind of people do that to Muslims today, right? One, who are completely ignorant of the history of Muslim civilization. 2, who hate Islam, who completely hate Islam and want to deliberately tarnish the name of Islam and Muslims. There is no third option in my mind. So I will assume the better. I'll assume the best thing for you, that you are ignorant about the history of Muslim civilization. I won't assume the latter for you, right? I don't think you are a Islam or Muslim hater. I don't think so.
I'm not,
I hope you're not.
First and foremost, I'm not a Muslim hater. I have huge respect for Islam.
So it's confirmed.
But I would like to extend that. I say Muslims as my cousin.
Good.
And I believe that we should work towards building a lasting peace. But
I
I
agree.
believe with peace, I believe is it truth and reconciliation.
Okay.
I believe for us to make peace, neither you nor I should deny the reality of what's happened.
Absolutely.
And I will say there have been Muslim leaders who've done incredible acts of kindness for the Jewish people. However,
Now we're talking.
even amongst the most those that are considered the greater.
So let me give some
let's
examples.
Go to Umar. Let's go to Umar.
No. I want to talk about Almohad, because you made a point,
Okay,
and
so let's go.
it's only fair that I respond to that point. So Al-Muwahidun were an extremist group that came to power in Morocco in the 12th century, and Muslims suffered at their hands before anyone else did. And in fact, when they did persecute Muslims, Christians, as well as Jews, who protected the Jews, who gave refuge to the Jews, Muslims elsewhere. Let me give you an example, a specific example. Who is known as the second Moses in Jewish history?
Maimonides.
Maimonides faced the Almohads firsthand. Maimonides was alive, born in Cordoba, raised in Cordoba, wrote in the Arabic language. His famous book, A Guide for the Perplexed, was written in the Arabic language in Hebrew characters. He was a scholar of Judaism who is known as the second Moses in Jewish history. He was so important that he was given this title, and he wrote Jewish commentaries on the Torah, and he flourished in a Muslim society. Now Almohads came on the scene and they forced him to accept Islam, which we wholeheartedly condemn. Muslims were condemning that. How do we know that? Maimonides, having pretended to accept Islam, moved to Egypt. Now when he went to Egypt, he went back to Judaism, and then there the judges put him on trial for apostatizing from Islam. What happened? He goes to court, and who testifies in his favor? A Jewish scholar from Spain who was being persecuted by Almohads, Al-Muwahidun, who were an extremist group which other Muslims were condemning at that time, like we do today with ISIS, right? He moved to Egypt. There, Muslims came to rescue him, and they said his conversion was forced. Therefore, it was not a conversion. That rule does not apply on him, and he was left alone. And he became what? He became a physician directly to the brother of the Sultan. The Sultan's brother was Malik al-Afdal, the brother of Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi, Saladin. Okay, so he was protected by the Muslims against a persecution by the Muslims. Okay, so this is very clear. This is the example you gave didn't actually help your case. Second example, very quickly, you made was that when the Jews did have good times with the Muslims, that was relative. Okay, it depends. They were still second-class citizens. I want to correct you there. I want to assume the best about you again, that you are completely ignorant of what happened in Spain.
Can we do one at a time? Can I?
No, because you raised 2 points. So let me quickly respond to it, then you can come back to it. Okay, I will respond to Joseph by giving him a number of examples. This claim again is completely misplaced, doesn't acknowledge history of Islam and Muslims with the Jewish people. There were Jewish prime ministers in Spain. Is everyone listening to me? Hello? Yes? There were Jewish prime ministers in Spain. How do you make someone who is a second-class citizen a prime minister? Is a question. And who am I talking about? Hyde ibn Shaprut. He was the prime minister to the most powerful Muslim monarch in the history of Western Europe. Abdurrahman III in the 10th century, Hyde ibn Shaprut was so powerful that he was writing letters to the ancestors of Joseph who were in Khazaria. Joseph is an Ashkenazi Jew. Okay, his ancestors come from Khazaria.
Moved into anti-Semitism. That's not true. We can go there, so it's like completely categorically false.
But there are, okay, this is something we can come back. That's not anti-Semitism, by the way.
It is. It's denying the Jewish people.
You mean Ashkenazis?
Ashkenazi Jews are from the Middle East. I've got Middle Eastern DNA. I can show you.
But how is that anti-Semitism?
To say that because you're denying the Jewish agency of the Jews. It's a myth that's propagated predominantly by anti-Semites. The Ashkenazi Jews are not real Jews.
But if it is an academic opinion, you can disagree with it. You can say it's rubbish. You can So, I mean, I'm not saying the opinion is true or not. We can talk about it another time, but I'm just presenting the opinion. It may well be very unpleasant, but to call it anti-Semitism, I don't agree with that. But anyway, so Hyde ibn Shaprut was writing letters to the king of Khazaria. This was a group of people in near Georgia, current day Georgia, who had come to Judaism, who had embraced Judaism, and the entire state became Jewish after the king himself. The king had accepted Judaism or embraced Judaism. His name was King Joseph. So Hyde ibn Shaprut was writing letters to him. He was writing letters to the Jewish people of Baghdad, whether they need anything from him. He's in a powerful position. Likewise, there was another prime minister called Samuel Hanagid. Samuel Hanagid was the prime minister in Grenada, which was also a Muslim state. And I can give you a list of Jewish scholars, dignitaries, ministers, poets, philosophers, theologians, who were flourishing under the rule of Islam in Spain, in North Africa, in Ayyubid Middle East, and as far as Mughal India. So what are we talking about here? So the Jewish condition was very much pleasant, and if you come back with more claims, then I will respond to them accordingly. Go ahead.
So you touched on, you look at this. This is how it works. You get your soundbite, then the camera disappears.
What? Okay,
so there's still two here.
His mic is still with me. I don't know where he's going. Maybe it's changing his position.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few things, and the first one I want to talk to is perfect. You mentioned Maimonides, Rambam, or the mic's going. We've lost the crowd. Sorry, YouTube.
No, there are two cameras there. There's still two cameras there. So don't be disappointed.
So you mentioned that after fleeing the Almohads, Maimonides went to Egypt. He lived in Fustat, which I think is near Cairo today, and now he lived there. And there's a myth that's propagated by many Muslims that he had a great existence. He loved living there. It was good for him.
Why is that a myth?
Because I'm going to read you his own words that he wrote there while he was living there.
Okay.
So this is from something, and people can Google it, called Igeret Teman, which is the epistle to Yemen.
The Yemeni Jews.
To the Yemeni Jews.
Okay. So it is highly doubted, by the way.
No, it's not.
Actually, the content of the letter is myth. It is not confirmed whether this letter can be traced back to Maimonides. We will discuss that. We'll come back to that. So before you use a source against me, please ensure that the source is actually authentic. What we do know.
Okay, what were your sources for Hyde Shaprut? What was your sources for Shmuel Hanagid? What was your sources for all of them?
Jewish writings as well as Muslim writings.
No.
Jewish as well as Muslim writings.
Which Jewish writings?
With Jewish writings?
No, which ones?
I have read a book titled The History of the Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewry. The author's name is Zion Zohar, Jewish author who has written the history of the Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewry. The name of the book is The History of the Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewry. Zion Zohar is the author. Then Bernard Lewis, also a Jewish historian, right? So any sources I will use, mainly They are Jewish sources, Jewish historians.
This is the interesting part. I'm actually bringing something which Jews universally accept as being authentic. You've read 2 books by contemporary scholars.
No, 2. Okay, you want more names?
No. All I'm trying to do is there are very few religious Jews that doubt the authenticity of the Agera. You're saying otherwise, and that's fine because you've read a book, and that's fine, or read a couple of books, or a few books. But I'm going to read what Maimonides actually says in his words.
Okay.
Now you can cast doubt on that, just like
we don't know. Maimonides actually said that. We don't know. When there's a doubt, what's the point of reading something? If I say Prophet Muhammad said X, Y, and Z, and if we cannot prove whether he said it or not,
but the only person who's casting doubt is you. Who says that this is false?
Okay, can you give us the source? As to
I've just given you. You give it to man. It's accepted universally as being written by Maimonides. You're saying it isn't, so I'm saying, what's your evidence that it isn't? Who says it isn't?
Scholars.
Which scholars?
Historians.
Which historians?
Okay. This is something I will.
Okay, you don't know, so you can come back
no.
in the YouTube comments. You can say where.
I will come back to you.
Yeah.
On this because
until then, I'm going to read what
I'm
Maimonides.
Prepared for this discussion.
Yeah, neither did I.
There are references I have. Okay, if you raise a specific question, we can come back to it.
So one thing I want to point out: you spoke for 15 minutes, 10 minutes. I didn't say a word.
Okay, so
I spoke.
Before
the minute I spoke, you started challenging, saying that's not real. That's not real.
Oh no, okay, no problem. Go ahead.
So what I'm going to read is what Maimonides actually says in his words. Now, this is half well into it, but effectively what's happening, there was Jews in Yemen who were considering converting to Islam, and he wrote a letter to the leader of that community, and this is effectively what he wrote. This is well into it. Remember, my co-religionists, that on account of the vast number of our sins, God has hurled us into the midst of this people, the Arabs, who have persecuted us severely. So Maimonides, who is your example of someone who...
Carry on reading. Yeah, please. I want you to read this now. This is actually helping me, by the way. We'll see how.
And passed beautiful and discriminatory legislation against us. As scripture has forewarned us, our enemies themselves shall judge us. Never did a nation molest, degrade, debase, and hate us as much as they. Therefore, when David of blessed memory, inspired by the Holy Spirit, envisaged the future tribulations of Israel, he bewailed and lamented their lot only in the kingdom of Ishmael and prayed in their behalf. And on it goes. But effectively,
no. I want you to continue reading a bit more. A few more lines. Continue.
What do you expect it to say?
Continue. Yeah, why are you reading it before you? Keep reading.
Tribulations of Israel.
No. Start from where you stop.
That's what I'm just getting up to. Bewailed and lamented the kingdom of Ishmael and prayed in their behalf for their deliverance, as is implied in the verse. Woe me that I sojourn with Meshech, that I dwell beside the tents of Kedar. Note the distinction between Kedar and the children of Ishmael.
Carry on. It's actually helping me. Carry on. This is going to carry on. Please do.
Yep.
Please do. You brought this up. I didn't bring it up.
For the Meshuggah and is of the lineage and children of Kedar, as they readily admit.
Yes.
Daniel alludes only to our humiliation and degradation. Like dust in the threshing, suffered at the hands of the Arabs. May they speedily be vanquished. When he says, and some of the host of the stars it cast down to the ground and trampled upon them. Although we dishonored by them beyond human endurance and had to put up with their fabrications, yet we behaved like him, who is depicted by by the inspired writer. But I am as a deaf man. I hear not, and I am as dumb man that. I am as a dumb man that openeth his mouth. Similarly, our sages instructed us to bear the provocations and preposterousness of Ishmael in silence. So on and on it goes. I don't want to bore the audience by reading all of it. But you spoke, I speak. The basic premise, after he made me read all that really bad, I apologise. But the basic premise is, Adnan said that the Almohads were bad. I accept that. Maimonides is my proof that the Muslims treat the Jews well. Because Maimonides, when he fled the Almohads, he had a Muslim testify for him in court, which is true. and he achieved great position of prominence in Islamic society, which is true. He was the physician to Salahuddin, I believe, by the end of his career. But even Maimonides, someone who we look at as an example of somebody who existing at a high level in Islamic society, when he's writing to his own people, he's honest. And he says that the Muslims have inflicted persecution upon us. We have suffered greatly. His words are, no nation has persecuted us more than this nation.
Okay.
So this is clearly, and even you put forward the argument that it's been fake. The fact that this has been universally accepted by Jews as being part of the narrative suggests there must be a remnant of truth in there, that there was persecution of Jews in Muslim society. Now, let's get on to what is that persecution.
Okay.
And you made 2 points.
Yeah.
I made 2 points and you made 2 points in response. Now you said, and maybe this is where we can make it a little more engaging, because the big long speeches don't really help any of us engage the viewers.
I agree.
So I'm going to say, I can give categorical examples of where I'm persecuted against in a caliphate that's run according to Sharia, according to the Sunnah of Muhammad. And my best example, my easiest example, zakat. Zakat is fixed. Yeah, there is a fixed amount of money that the Muslims pay. Jizya is not fixed. Jizya is dependent upon whatever the caliph decides that the Jew is going to pay, or the person of the book is going to pay. Now, under some caliphates, that was a reasonable amount. And it does say that the poor don't have to pay the jizya. But if they're not poor, then it's down to the caliph to determine what the Jews pay, what the Christians pay. And that is separate from what the Muslims pay. And it can be a lot more, and it can be less. It really depends on the caliphate. And so when you segregate a society and you say Muslims pay this tax and non-Muslims pay another tax, that ultimately is an example of discrimination that has been abused throughout history. Okay,
Great.
Make it more quick fire.
Great points. Now, coming back to the letter of Maimonides, first of all, we need to show whether the letter is actually authentic. Even if it is authentic, let's assume for the sake of the argument, Maimonides actually wrote that letter. There is no problem in it. I'll tell you why. Maimonides has been severely persecuted by a Muslim group called Almohad, Al-Muwahidun, right? If a person who was tortured or persecuted by ISIS today and was to write a letter about Muslims, I wouldn't blame him. I wouldn't blame him for assuming that I am being persecuted by Muslims, because these people have the appearance of Muslims, unfortunately, right? Now, Maimonides, the question is, when he wrote this letter, where was he writing this letter from? Egypt. Okay. Now, what period of his Egyptian existence was this? Was this the early period when he had recently come from Spain, having been persecuted and put through all that? Or was it actually after he had become the physician to the Sultan himself? Okay, if Maimonides is writing this letter after he is a physician to the Sultan, the doctors to the Sultan, then there are two options here. Either he is lying about his condition, because how can you be the physician to the Sultan, the doctor to the Sultan, to the king himself, and say our condition is very bad? And it is very possible that he was lying. Why? Because why is he writing this letter? And who is he writing this letter to? According to what Joseph read, this letter was being written to a Jewish group of people in Yemen who were considering accepting Islam, who were contemplating becoming Muslims. And his job as Rambam, or the second Moses, or the shepherd of the flock, if you like, his job was to sway them, to put them off, to push them away from Islam. And to say all those things, it does exactly that. These people are barbarians, they persecute us, we're not happy with them, don't accept Islam therefore. So all these things put together, one can easily contextualize the letter. But looking at the bigger picture, now it is very clear that Joseph accepted that Maimonides definitely had a high position in Muslim societies. If the Jews were persecuted as he claimed earlier, why would a Jew be a physician to the Sultan? Why would a Jewish person be given that position? And such a sensitive physician. Who is a physician? Someone who's checking your pulse. Someone who's prescribing medicine for you. Even possibly giving you medicine. He can easily poison the Sultan and kill him. Why would the Sultan trust a Jewish man, and not only any ordinary Jewish man, a rabbi of that repute, a rabbi of that status, someone who is known as the second Moses among the Jews later on, actually. So let's not be anachronistic about history. So it is very clear that he had a high position. Now it doesn't stop there. We can look at other Jewish testimonies from Spain. No, very quickly. No, good. Yeah, let me finish this. Yeah, very quickly. Yeah, there was a Jewish rabbi called Behaviour bin Pakuda. Have you heard of him?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know Behaviour?
Yeah.
Behaviour bin Pakuda, writing in Cordoba, 1080s. He writes that our living condition is not the same as the Muslims, it is better than theirs. We are more prosperous than the Muslims are under the rule of the Arabs. Here you go, that's one testimony. Let's fast forward. Let's Al-Andalus, yes. Let's fast forward. Yeah, let's fast forward. Okay, we have, for example, in the 9th century, okay, there is an anonymous Jewish source, a commentary on the Torah. Okay, it's called Petrus Ephron. Petrus Ephron, Karen Armstrong, she refers to this book in her History of Jerusalem, and she states that this anonymous author, Jewish author, wrote about the conditions of the Jewish people in Jerusalem in the 9th century during the Abbasid period. He states that we have been honored by the Ishmaelites, that we worship together the same God in this holy place. In other words, he was praising the condition of the Jewish people under Islamic domain. Then we have other testimonies from, I'm giving you different dynasties very quickly because time is running out and Joseph needs to talk about this. Yeah? And I have written an article on this, by the way. This is why I know these sources. Yeah? Then we move forward to the Ottoman period when Jerusalem was governed by the Ottomans. To be very precise, during the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who governed from 1520 to 1566, if I'm not mistaken. Right? He governed 46 years. During his reign, the Jewish people flourished in Jerusalem. How do we know this? A scholar named Amnon Cohen. Amnon Cohen, who published his book in 1994, and the book is titled A Word from Within. The court records from the Islamic Court of Jerusalem. In these two volumes, he discusses the history of the Jewish cases. Are you listening, everyone? Jewish cases filed within the Islamic Court of Jerusalem. So he studied cases from the year 1500 to 1570. 70 years of cases he studied. He came up with 1,000 Jewish cases filed in the Sharia court, filed by the Jewish people voluntarily. And Amnon Cohen, being a Jewish scholar from Israel, he wanted to know why the Jews were doing that. Why were they going to the Sharia court, even though they had their Beth Dins, they had their own Jewish courts in Jerusalem. But he states, this is a Jewish Israeli scholar, in 1994, he states, based upon his study, this was because the Jews expected justice to come quicker from the Sharia court than their own courts. And cases vary from for example, from a case about nafaka, what we call, provisions. If a wife has been divorced and she needs provisions from the husband, and there are other domestic cases being discussed in these courts. So his conclusion is that the Jews of Jerusalem in the 16th century were more prosperous than the Muslims were.
So perfect.
Okay. Okay. Wait. Of course, Joseph.
You don't do quick fire. You really don't do quick fire.
I'm finishing because this topic is so important.
What about the zakat?
And
yeah, but
I'm coming back to zakat issue.
Can we stop and then do zakat?
These examples from different dynasties and different periods and different places show you what general pattern of Muslim behavior was: kind, generous, and harmonious towards the Jews, right? The Jewish people flourished in different ways. I can give you examples. Joseph, please. I was very patient listening to you. Be patient with me as well. I know some of this information is difficult to fathom.
It's wrong.
I'm giving references. Wrong, right? And most references I gave are from Jewish sources, by the way. Even Bernard Lewis, someone like Bernard Lewis, a staunch Zionist who advised the US government to attack Iraq in 2003, even him in his book Jews of Islam acknowledges that the Muslims treated the Jews with generosity in comparison to what was happening to them in Christian Europe. Okay, so and over 1,000 years, Bernard Lewis states, for over 1,000 years, Jews survived extinction due to Muslim protection for over 1,000 years. And he also states 90% of the Jewish population of the world survived destruction under the protection of Islam and Muslims. Bernard Lewis, again, my references are very clear. Go and check and come back to me if I'm lying. Okay. Now, next point, zakat.
Can we come back to zakat?
No. You raised it. Please be patient with me. I'm finishing very soon and you can come back. I will listen to you patiently. No, you can't come in because it's me and Joseph. Okay. So, zakat issue. Now, Joseph made a claim that zakat is fixed and jizya is not fixed. Actually, that's not true as well, because in our earliest sources, we are told, firstly, the primary rules to deal with the non-Muslims. What is the primary rule? In Bukhari, we have a statement from the second caliph of Islam, Umar bin Khattab. Umar was the second caliph of Islam. And what did the Prophet say about him? Alaykum bi sunnati wa sunnati al-khulafa al-rashidin al-mahdi min ba'di. Upon you is my way and the way of my rightly guided caliph. Who were they? Umar is one of them, so we have to follow him. Umar, upon his deathbed, when his stomach was split open, dying man, he advised for his successor. He stated, whoever succeeds me, beware of the rights of the non-Muslims. Do not overburden them. Do not put a burden upon them more than they can bear. Umar, the second caliph of Islam, the words of a dying man, right? These words were directly relevant to the Jewish people, okay? Because who was he talking about? He was talking about the Jews and the Christians, okay? So what is jizya? Jizya is 1 gold coin per year. It is clearly stated in Fathul Buldan, Imam Buladhuri's book, Fathul Buldan, The Conquest of Lands. In that book, there are documents that clearly state that the jizya is 1 gold coin every year, which is 4 grams of gold, in current value 200 pounds a year. So if there is a millionaire Jewish merchant who has £1 million in his bank account, in theory, theoretically, according to the Islamic sources, he has to pay 200 pounds every year. If a Muslim has £1 million in his bank account, he must pay 2.5%, which is 25,000 pounds. Where is justice in that? I, as a Muslim, can stand up here and say, you know what, Islam is actually not just to the Muslim people. Islam is more just to the Jewish people. The Jewish merchant has to pay 200 pounds every year, even though he may have £1 million in his bank account. But me, I have to give 25,000 pounds over or for £1 million. Now, this is theoretically the earliest Islamic sources. What happened later on, no doubt, sources are abused, they were misused. Even today, groups like ISIS and other extremist entities are using sources to abuse. The Jewish people are doing it. The state of Israel is abusing, misusing the Jewish sources. So we have extremists, we have unpleasant characters, we have people who abuse our sources throughout our history. Jews did it, Muslims did it, Christians did it. So the good thing about us, me and Joseph, is that we are brothers in that thought. Why? Because we also believe that there are extremist Jews who do extreme things and abuse the sources. I also believe that there are Muslims who are extremist Muslims who abuse the sources. Now, over to you. Sorry, do apologize for long
that was supposed to be a quick fire round.
But you're raising points that need to be responded.
It's fine.
Your turn to respond, and then.
So what I want to point out is what just happened then. So we went to the Almohads and we agreed on the Almohads. They're not good Muslims. You brought a proof which was Maimonides. And we then established that actually your understanding of Maimonides maybe isn't the Jewish understanding of Maimonides. And the Jewish understanding of Maimonides is that he was persecuted under Islam. You then went to some very a lot of material I haven't heard of. So you mentioned Petrus F1 or something. Never heard of it in my life. So we're now talking very fringe sources which most Jews are not familiar with. So I will go away and research.
Bernard Lewis.
Bernard Lewis he's a historian. He's got nothing to do with the actual. I'm talking about the
Jewish
source.
historian.
I'm talking about source material. I'm talking about the source material. And then you mentioned, and you went to the 16th century Ottomans in Israel. Now I would encourage anybody to type into Google 1517 massacre of Jews in Hebron. The Jews were massacred by Ottomans in Hebron, in Israel. And so again, at a time when you've given us Jews having a good straight to the massacre. At a time when Jews were supposed to not being persecuted, there's a clear evidence of not just persecution, but a massacre taking place in the very land you said it was supposed to be amazing. Now, you've said a lot of truth. There were Jews that did achieve great positions, including Maimonides, in Islamic society. But achieving a high position in some Islamic societies does not mean that Jews have been treated well throughout Islamic history. The Jewish understanding, if you speak to any of the Jews from the Middle East, almost all of them will universally tell you that they suffered in modern history and in ancient history. And so I believe Jews and Muslims can and will coexist. I think we have more in common than that divides us, and I think we do have a rich history of coexistence. But I think there needs to be a recognition from many Muslims that history isn't as they see it through these rose-tinted glasses, but their ancestors have inflicted pain upon my ancestors. And you can go right the way back to Muhammad. You can go back to the Battle of the Trenches. You can go back to the beheading of Jews. You can go from the very, very beginning. There has been persecution. Now you can justify that and say they were treacherous, they betrayed Muhammad, therefore. But to this day,
you're doing it for me.
But to this day, because of a battle that took place hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, I, a Jew, am not allowed to step foot in Mecca and Medina.